What's going on, YouTube? So, as everyone knows, the newest season, there is a ton of new updates to Descendants. Yes, I do know there is a rework coming in January, but that doesn't necessarily mean Valby will get reworked again. That being said, I do think a couple of changes have been made, and Valby is quite cracked. So, let's dive in. So first, I'd like to go over Valby's basic kit. Valby is a damage over time character. She does a lot of damage just sitting there igniting the field in her pool of water, which isn't cold damage, it is non-attribute damage, as we are all aghast. Valby's passive has since been changed. Used to, Valby's passive would decrease the cost of things when you're sitting in a pool. Now you just get straight MP recovery, which it is a lot of MP recovery. 0.5 is the equivalent of 2 gold roll sensor units with MP recovery. Her first ability is a bubble bullet. You can see this bubble bounce several times. It bounces and then it explodes. On explosion, it deals an increase of 25% per bounce. And if you pay attention to the bounces, each one of these squares is 5 meters. So we'll stand on the edge. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7, 5, 10, 15, 20. So the bouncing bubble has a range of 20 meters. In addition to that, it leads a small puddle, and the puddle deals damage over time because she is a dots character. Now, Valby does introduce a debuff called Laundry. The Laundry just decreases their electric and non-attribute damage resistance by 20%. This will net you a small amount of damage return. You can increase the amount of non-attribute damage resistance with Python, and you can increase the amount of electric resistance with Sharon's Battle Soup Melting rounds. Her second ability is Plop Plop. This is a teleportation ability. It has a pretty decent range. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. 25-ish is the teleportation range of Plop Plop. This also creates a puddle of water, which does damage over time. Every enemy you hit with Plop Plop decreases the cooldown to a maximum of a 10-second reduction. So if I hit 0 enemies, you'll see a small cooldown of what appears to be 7 seconds. If I hit multiple enemies, I have no cooldown because the cooldown reduction is a static number, and I have a 7.9 cooldown currently on the build. Valby in general is best built with a lot of cooldown, so almost on everything I do recommend Nimble Fingers and MP conversion. You can multi-talented for some tech, which I'll go over later. The third ability, Cleanup, is a waterway. She turns into a liquefied state where you can't really do anything except for skate forward. You cannot jump, you cannot shoot, but you can revive your teammates. It has a locked-in movement speed on it and a damage reduction of 50%. You'll notice that this is pretty famous in things like the Valby run. If you don't know what the Valby run is, you essentially go to an outpost and you just draw a circle with Valby and leave the water there, and it kills all of the enemies repetitively, allowing you to grind for several materials. Now you see the damage reduction at 50%. In most of the builds, I do not run an immunity module. However, in this particular build, which is halfway built, I didn't want to delete all of my modules because it is an actual build. You'll see incoming damage modifier at 10.5%. If I go into the character, I go to defense, you'll see an incoming damage modifier of minus 60%. The static 0.1 is the module. Now, the reason the module is really good for Valby is because in Cleanup with the 50%, you essentially think of half of your damage that you aren't taking. Now you're adding 10% to that damage. So now you go from 50 to 40, which is a 20% damage reduction. We're getting double bang for your buck with the auto immunity module while you're in Cleanup, because this one module will double the effectiveness if you only take half the damage. Then the fourth ability, Laundry Bomb. Laundry Bomb is a unique weapon in which its magazine size is affected by multiple factors of the gun that you are holding, but not the gun itself, just rolls and modules. On the Peacemaker, which in my opinion you'll need if you want the best Valby, I have Compulsive Magazine and Expand Weapon Charge. This will maximize your rounds per magazine at 88%, and then if you have the 12% roll, you get a 100% increase in magazine. If you are not going to use the Slayer set ever, like in any of your builds, then you don't need a 12% roll. But if you're going to plan on using like the Hunter set or the Annihilation set for Supply Moisture, you will need a 12% roll for maximum effectiveness on the Perforator, on the Peacemaker. No, you cannot use 11.9. You have to use 12%. If you're not using the Slayer set and you have 11.9 and you're at 99.9% of an extra magazine size, you will only get 5 rounds. So in her ultimate, you'll see I have 6 rounds. Whenever you build for range, which I will show in a later build, this does in fact do a lot. There is some tech you can employ. Payout, I could. The tech for the infinite ammo inside of the unique weapon only works for one module, and that module is Firing Fiesta, with the exception of Haley inside of her Zenith whilst shooting Payout. I don't know why that's the case. There's something in the coding, but it's by design, or they would have fixed it by now. And that is Valby's base kit. So now I'll go over the Transcendent modules for Valby. Up first, we have one called Tidal Wave. Tidal Wave converts her cleanup ability into a pass-through type. If you're building into this module as your mainstay for damage, that's fine. It does a pretty decent amount of damage. On the pass-through, you develop stacks, although you can't see the stacks. And then whenever you end it, you explode. Whenever you explode, you deal a damage increase per entity of 15%, or a maximum of 150% additive onto the stack. So if your skill power is 650%, you will do around 1600 skill power modifier on the burst damage. The laundry itself lasts for quite some time, especially if you build into duration, which I have done. Once again, the damage reduction at 50%. So a immunity module here is very useful. This is a build I have made. I really like Tidal Wave for a lot of things inside of dungeons. Not so much Colossi, but it is really good. The next one I'll go into Spiral Tidal Wave. Spiral Tidal Wave has its uses. I would say anything that warrants Spiral Tidal Wave being the mainstay of damage in a set. So if you're not fighting Gluttony, I do not believe this is a good build because of the heavy mana consumption that it would take to do massive amounts of damage with Tidal Wave. You can see the MP drainage. Even while standing inside of a puddle of water, the MP drainage is basically not to be trifled with, honestly. You are going to drain yourself a lot for Spiral Tidal Wave. However, if you're inside Tony and you need to juggle the balls, this is fine. If in the future we have better MP drainage removal, you'll be able to spam it really well with multi-talented, provided that you have MP conversion and nimble fingers on.
Watch out for the splash! Here I go!
It is kind of crazy, but like I said, you run out of MP essentially immediately. The next Transcendent module is a lot of people's favorites, Hydro Pressure Bomb. The problem I have with Hydro Pressure Bomb is the same problem I have with Spiral Tidal Wave, and that it is an MP guzzler. Yes, it does enough damage to warrant using. Without multi-talented attack, this is as good as you're getting the cooldown. You can get a little bit lower actually with either 2 pieces of the Hunter set, a good reactor, and some module changes. However, you can do multi-talented tech here. The only thing you have to do is proc a dimension skill first. You'll see the buff with the little cooldown timer on the left side of the originating Peacemaker buff. If you use this, you'll be able to spam Hydro Pressure Bomb, but once again, you run out of MP basically immediately. So it's not something I really wanted to do. However, it's not a bad. Then the one that I think is Colossus boss with is Supply Moisture. Supply Moisture gives you 2 abilities. One, it increases your firearm attack increase amount by 10%, which isn't really that much. However, it does increase your firearm critical hit rate and your skill critical hit rate by 20%. This is on base, and it does multiply with modules. For instance, you'll see that my critical hit rate with the perforator currently is at 27%. If I stand in a puddle of water with supply moisture activated, it is 70%. This lets you do a ton of damage and is almost like a miniature Haley, and you can just see the crits fly. In addition, if you build into crit into your abilities, you can have a mix between a good amount of damage and a lot amount of firearm damage. So while being able to clear the trash ads, you can also deal a lot of damage to commanders. This is a very viable module, I think. Another is water play. They have since buffed water play with season 2 quite substantially. The water play now has a skill power modifier of 500%. So 500% is nothing to scoff at when it just continuously does it. The best part about water play is that it decreases the MP cost, and the puddles that water play makes you can stack, in addition to it having a maximum expandable range of 300%, which means you can triple the range and area. But if you activate the multi-talented buff, you can stack your water puddles and you can see multiple instances of the tick. This water play build I have built as basically my mainstay for an ad clearing build. And then the last one is Singing Water. Singing Water is a 4th ability conversion. This just taunts enemies in the range. So any enemy that is around the puddle will come and attack this turret. The turret itself does have hit points, but it in of itself does not do damage. I did see something inside of the patch notes that said when this is dealt enough damage to destroy itself, it explodes and deals damage, but this is not here, so I assume that whenever we see the Descendant rework in January, it will be added to this module. Not sure though. That is all conjecture. Now the good and the bad with this particular module. The good is that taunting isn't that bad in multiplayer. It is actually kind of decent. All of the ads target this instead of you. The downside is that you cannot taunt Colossi or Commanders. So this only targets the trash mods that basically die anyway. I am not a huge fan of Singing Water. I do like the concept, but not in execution. So the first build that I want to go into is Tidal Wave. I do think that there's only 3 modules that I actually care about, or that's really worth it. A lot of people are really into Hydro Pressure Bomb. I think Hydro Pressure Bomb might be slightly overrated, just because, yes, it is very fun. It's probably the funnest module she has, honestly, and it's still good, but Tidal Wave is better for doing what Hydro Pressure Bomb wants to do. The Hydro Pressure Bomb comes with a 1500 skill power modifier, and then the Tidal Wave comes with a 1100% skill power modifier. The only difference is with a Tidal Wave, you can circle and do like 3 or 4 slashes of damage with Tidal Wave in one instance of Hydro Pressure Bomb. Not to mention the explosion that comes out of Hydro Pressure Bomb at the end. So I think, or the explosion that comes out of Tidal Wave at the end. So I think that Tidal Wave is a better module. It might come down to preference though. If you like Hydro Pressure, enjoy your Hydro Pressure. However, I do have Psychological Victory. The Psychological Victory comes with the 50% damage reduction. Whenever you stack them, you have 60%, taking only 40% of the damage. Then I have MP Conversion and Nimble Fingers. Yes, you do need this much cooldown to constantly maintain a Tidal Wave proc. There are other ways if you finagle with your reactor or get cooldown on your sets. However, I prefer this way, because it does more damage. We have Dangerous Ambush, because Dangerous Ambush is one of the goated modules. As long as the enemy is not targeting you, you get a damage boost. The only reason I have Skill Simplification here is because we don't have room for the 4th dimension modifier. And Skill Simplification, you don't really care about the MP decrease, because the only 2 things you're going to be using are Tidal Wave and Laundry Bomb. I do not foresee you using Plop Plop or Bubble Bullet, really. Then we have Power Increase and non-attribute amplification. Whenever you're running a non-crit build, you want power increase and the attribute amplification module of that build, because the power increase and the non-attribute amplification end up multiplying each other. So you get 1.9 times 1.9 instead of just the 1.6 that you would otherwise have gotten. There is a skill extension for minimum duration. The duration that you're going to walk away with is 10%, is 10 seconds on this build. You can change it. You can add whatever you like. I do also prefer a skill expansion. The skill expansion is for her 4th ability, Laundry Bomb, simply so I can stack the enemies like so, and then just walk through them, proccing the ability over and over, and then kill them when you need to with the explosion. The grappling hook doesn't really matter here. I just like mid-air maneuvering for some dungeons, and sometimes I go for long distance. The other modules I don't really bother with too much, though. The next build is everyone's favorite, Supply Moisture. This is a balanced build between skill damage and gun damage. If you really just wanted to go toes deep into gun damage, you really can. However, I do like having the option, especially now with those shields that are out. With this one, you do not need the Peacemaker. You really want to focus on guns that do a lot of damage. In my opinion, Greg's Reverse Fate is the best weapon here, simply because of how many crits you get off. On my Greg's Reverse Fate, I like to build it like such. I prefer Spray and Pray on the Reversed Fate, and of course, it doesn't really matter what module you put here. Anything here is going to net you a small amount of damage return, so if I have to catalyze it, I will catalyze it, but I am currently waiting for my Reverse Fate to get to level 40 once again. Alternatively, if you don't want to use Spray and Pray, you can, of course, go with the attack module that is Fire Conductor. A lot of people prefer Fire Conductor on their Greg's Reverse Fate. However, I just prefer the unlimited ammo once you get the perk off, and that is a personal preference. The reactor that you want for Supply Moisture is going to boil down to how you're supply moisturing. If you are a strict gun damage descendant, you don't really care about anything other than cooldown and duration. However, if you want to deal damage with your abilities, it really depends. You can just pick an ability, honestly. I do believe that Plop Plop will net you the most amount of utility versus damage, so a gun with dimension and non-attribute will probably net you the best, or crit damage as well. A good one is critical hit damage and duration up. I do think the best reactor for this build is going to be critical hit damage and dimension power boost. I have been unlucky to be blessed with that reactor, but we're in the running here, guys. Perforator is another gun that does extremely well with a whole bunch of crit. That is simply because whenever you crit, you get a whole bunch of meteorites. And when payout triggers, once again, you're just ad clearing anyway. It's almost a discount Thunder Cage. I prefer it over the Thunder Cage whenever you can stack critical hit on it. There is a slew of other critical hit weapons. Enduring Legacy. This is probably the best firearm loadout for a gun Valby. Just simply the damage output that you can do is quite substantial. For the build itself, we have focus on dimension and focus on attribute for the cooldown here, as well as shot focus for the firearm attack. Yes, the skill power modifier is minus 15%, but the majority of the damage that you're going to do to the enemies you need to do damage to is going to be through firearm attack. I would rather lose about 10% of damage on my abilities, knowing that I'm going to clear trash anyway. And then Frontlines, Skill Insight, and Skill Concentration are the critical hit modules. You can put emergency measures on here, but you would have to probably take off the shot focus for doing so. That would net you more skill damage and less gun damage, of course. I have HP collector just because as gun Valby, you'll find yourself sitting in one spot for a lot. So just in case you are sitting in someone's acid puddle or whatever, you can just kill enemies for health. Then I have the 2 hit point modules because once again, health is important if you are a stationary target. If you pick your guns wisely, you can walk away with very large critical hit rate from your firearms. If you have a well-built firearm with a lot of crit rate on it, typically you will have around 40% to 48% critical hit rate on a gun. Valby's Descendant module Supply Moisture gives you a firearm critical hit rate increase of 20%. This is on the base. So whatever your critical hit rate is on your gun, you add to this 20%, and that is the total amount of critical hit rate you add on the stack. So if I have 40%, that is 8% out of 20%. 40% of 20% is 8%. So Supply Moisture on my Enduring Legacy will net me an extra 28% critical hit rate, as well as a firearm increase amount of 10%. However, that 10% is additive. So I have 93%. Now it's 103% if I'm standing in a puddle. Not that large of a deal, honestly. Then the last one, and honestly, my favorite, is Waterplay. Waterplay, once again, has been very buffed with the new changes. Waterplay is a fusion type ability that is non-crit, so a fusion type reactor is best. I go for fusion skill power here and dimension just because I will also use plop plop, so I want plop plop to gain a bonus as well. However, I could do multiple things, non-attribute, even duration or cooldown. You will find the Peacemaker here is the best weapon to use. For anyone saying that you should upgrade your reactor, I'm only going to upgrade reactors that are perfect, honestly, because I don't want to waste a whole bunch of materials. And I do believe that upgrading the reactor from 2 to 5 is not really worth the resource expenditures. It's only a 10% increase in overall damage, and the amount of resources that it takes is quite freaking substantial. But I have multi-talented here, so I can just yeet the water. And you can see a ton of numbers just murdering people. It accumulates to about 1 million damage a second inside of 400% runs. No, you still cannot boss with this build, honestly. I wouldn't boss with anything Valby has outside of Supply Moisture. To maximize your damage out of Valby, what I typically do is I spawn 4 Waterplay puddles or 3, and then I plop somewhere else and shoot whilst that is happening. I don't always have enough time to shoot, but I don't really need it. I have a maximum expansion and a maximized range on here because Waterplay goes up to 300%. So that radius is absolutely gigantic. Once again, power increase and non-attribute amplification are the way to go. I have focus on fusion and focus on fusion. So Waterplay is by far, I think, the best ad clearing module that you can get on Valby. She will turn an entire terrain into water, and she is quite useful. That is, I think, the best ways to build Valby right now in Season 2. Maybe it'll change whenever the new Descendant rework comes out. We'll check that out. Reactor farming has gotten a little bit better, but I think it's still very time consuming because for this one character on these 3 builds, I need 3 or 4 reactors amongst 3 different weapon groups. However, I really do love the fact that they changed the grouping. I did this on Twitch. If you're interested in that, check out the link in the description. Check out my channel. If you like the way I do content, consider subscribing. Y'all have a sick day and peace out.